right, Sam. Well, I wanted to have you on mainly because I figured you probably missed talking to me. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to hear my voice. Because I know how you probably get. I'm safe to say, and that's probably right, isn't it?
It's a long off-season, Kime, and so this is just quite a joy to be back with you.
There you go. It's only been a month. Well, but I did want to have you on because last week while we were all doing serious reporting, you were down playing in Mobile, Alabama, watching quarterbacks, football on the field stuff, but you had the fun assignment. So I will say that. And, but I wanted to have you on to talk quarterbacks because this is obviously the big thing. Five of the top six quarterbacks were down there, except for Matt Corral, of course. So I wanted to get some impressions from you, just what you saw and heard up close that you can share what you heard about these quarterbacks. And in general, what were some of the things that you heard from people there just about this class? Does it match with what has been said previously to the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, and it was such a quiet week last week that I was glad I was able to get away and kind of make, get some of that time with these quarterbacks. But I think that because five of those top six quarterbacks were there, that kind of tells you what you need to know about this quarterback class, right? Because when you have guys that are seniors coming out and when you have a lack of a true number one at the top of that class, I think that tells you that this is not a slam dunk class like you've had in the past with Joe Burrow or Kyler Murray, those surefire number one picks, Trevor Lawrence last year. So, I mean, the things that you've heard, that really, I think it's a two-man race at this point to be the first quarterback taken. You have the safer option in Kenny Pickett at a Pitt, a guy that scouts and people that I had talked to down in Mobile think projects as a Derek Carr or a Kirk Cousins long-term. And then you have Malik Willis out of Liberty, who has all the traits. He can run, he can throw. He actually had the fastest throw that the combine has measured since 2019, 75 miles per hour out of his hand, which is obviously a really impressive number. But as we saw in the Senior Bowl, he does take off. He has a long way to go mechanically. He's not consistent. Sometimes, his talents let him create those big explosive plays, but sometimes it caused him to throw interceptions. He threw 12 last year, tied for seventh most in SBS. But you have to wait for him. He's probably going to have to sit a year. And I had one guy tell me that he thinks he's rawer than Josh Allen was in 2018. So really you're looking at two different evaluations, two different type of guys at the top of the class. And then at the rest of the class we can get into if you'd like, but that's kind of the broad overview.
And I heard the same thing about Malik about being more raw than Josh Allen. He's not, and the thing that I've always heard, and I've said this on here, that this class, pretty much the consensus that I've heard from others is that the number one quarterback in this class would have gone after each of the five last year. So like Mac Jones goes 15. It may have been that the next guy goes 19 to Washington. But when you bring up a Derek Carr type, well, he was a second round pick, which is probably the level. And there's nothing wrong if he maxes out as Derek Carr. Well, people want to trade for Derek Carr now. So there's nothing wrong with that. But do you take that at 11? And that's part of the thing. What did you get some impressions of just being around him and being able to watch him work? What were some of your impressions of him?
Of Pickett?
Of Pickett, yeah.
Yeah. So Pickett, for me, he was the guy that at the Senior Bowl opening press conference on Tuesday, he was the guy that spoke. Jim Nagy, the executive director, spoke very highly of him. He is a guy who was roommates with Joe Burrow at the Manning Passing Academy. To me, he kind of has, it seems like he has a lot of connections in the league. He's very polished. He's sort of the guy that looks the part, that is the leader. Obviously, he had three pretty mediocre years at Pitt and then kind of exploded during his senior year. But he seems like a guy that you couldn't ask a question that would faze him. Very steady. He seems like, kind of the guy. Malik Willis, when we talked to him, was, I thought, very impressive. He kind of went on a charm offensive. He sat down, he said, good morning. And a couple of reporters mumbled good morning back. And he was like, oh, no one says good morning anymore. I guess y'all just must stare at each other. And so, and then from then on, he went and he handled questions really well. I mean, hey, when you left Auburn, you said multiple times it's because you weren't working hard enough. Are there concerns about that in the future? Are you a cerebral is the word he kept using. Are you a cerebral quarterback? And I thought he handled it really well. He was pretty, he was pretty affable and for the 10 minutes that we saw him anyway. And there was a lot of moments in the Senior Bowl where he was, kind of overtly being a good teammate with his other quarterbacks. But those are kind of the impressions that I got of being up close with those two guys.
It's funny with Malik during the game, which is what I was able to watch. And I think practices are really telling because you see how they work up close. You see how they interact during practices, how they are in drills, et cetera. But during the game, the one thing that impressed me with him, and it's hard from a TV copy to see why did you run? But what I know is that there were some early protection breakdowns where he turned a 5 to 8 yard loss into an incompletion, which is a major win, and so I think he has that ability. It also, one of the things, and I'm curious if you were able to see this up close, is they talk about layering the throws, throwing a little bit more finesse on some throws. Did you see or hear any of that with him as a concern, and if so, what level of a concern?
Yeah, I think that he's capable of that, but it was pretty remarkable during the Senior Bowl practices how he would just get out of the pocket and he would look deep. And I think that the numbers from Zebra Technologies, kind of the player tracking data, backs that up. But really, I think that it seemed like he was, and I had a scout tell me this as well, he seemed intent on showing everyone the physical tools that he has. He would get out of the pocket, he would throw it deep. He would show off that arm strength, especially on Wednesday. There was a big downpour on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And so, I think he kind of seemed intent on, hey, my talent translates no matter the conditions, no matter what it is. I can get out of the pocket, I can throw, I can find that guy. And yeah, there were some touch passes. But I think he could layer those throws, just maybe wasn't looking for it as much. I think that a really telling example was, so the Lions staff was the coach for Malik Willis and their quarterbacks coach, Mark Brunell, obviously the former NFL quarterback as well. He got really fired up when Malik Willis checked it down to the running back on a swing pass on one play, because he was throwing it deep so much, I think, that when he checked down, Mark Brunell, got pretty fired up, went over, got into him a little bit. And that to me was really telling, because when Malik Willis tells you, I want to be a cerebral quarterback, I want to take what the defense gives me, I want to be able to show them that I can consistently make the right decision. And then for Brunell to get as fired up as he did, that was a pretty illustrative example to me of where Willis wants to go.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example too of that. And you don't see a guy get fired up. Listen, when I would coach, middle schoolers, if a kid is doing the same thing over and over and finally does what you say, this is the play you want to make, and he does it, I'm going to get fired up too. Sam, if I had coached you, I'd have been fired up like that. How's that? But so I think that's a great example of what they're looking for. And I would hope, like with Malik, that a guy like him, you don't want to go overboard trying to show something, because your talent is unique. And you watch Josh Allen and you watch the Mahomes in that one game or in the playoffs where they were making plays that had nothing to do with being cerebral. It's because you're different dudes. And I think that's where Malik will have to get that, but that's why they can, and coming from Liberty is another concern, but that's why you say, put him in the right spot, let him, he's going to play, no matter what they say, he's going to play as a rookie. I don't care where he goes. He's going to end up playing, because they always do, right? But get in the right spot for him and then go from there. Do you have any lasting impressions of him, either from a game or any other moment that stood out to you?
I would say that Brunell one is important.
That's a good example.
He made a really nice throw. Actually, it was a bootleg to his left. He made a nice throw to that Colorado State tight end, McBride. And I think that just obviously, like, the things that stand out are the athleticism and his really strong arm, right? Because those are the things that I think we've seen throughout this playoffs. If you're going to duel with an Allen, Josh Allen, or Patrick Mahomes, like, you got to be capable of doing some of those things athletically. And it kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about, okay, if Kenny Pickett tops out as Kirk Cousins, as Derek Carr, yes, people do want to trade for them, but there is a part of me that says, can you win with those guys sustainably?
You have to have a lot around them. That's right.
one person put it to me this way: you are going to win with Kenny Pickett, but you are not going to win because of him.
And that's a great way to put it. Yep. And I think
so
that's yeah.
And so to me, if Malik Willis is a low floor, high ceiling guy, if he's a high risk, high reward guy, if he has the capability of being a top quarter of the league guy, of being a guy that you can win because of, you can put the game on his shoulder. To me, it's almost worth it rather than playing it safe. Because if you get 4 years down the road and Kenny Pickett's Derek Carr, and you're saying, we don't know if this is our guy, we're topping out in the divisional round, maybe the wild card round, and you got to pay him. Is that a guy you can commit Kirk Cousins money to? I mean, it's the same thing. I think if they trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously that's been talked about. Like, what is that? What is that making your ceiling? Is that making you a Super Bowl ceiling team?
We're right. And I think that's the thing with both those guys is you have to be able to have the room. And this is why with here, not to go down this whole road, but with Cousins, the concern here wasn't so much do they think he can play, because they're willing to pay him at a certain amount. But you get to a higher amount, now you can't build around him. And you're right, those guys need guys around them. Mahomes, Allen, those guys. Now, Allen needed guys around him too. And he's still on the deal. So you can still do it. But I think that is something that teams will definitely have to consider. And at what point do you think, listen, if you think Willis, if he only has to sit a year and you think he can play, then I think you're negligent if you don't take him, right? Because then it's like, okay, for 1 year, Mahomes sat for a year. But that's where if you get a Jimmy G or a Trubisky who can be that guy that he can help him grow or can, help lead him. I guess Jimmy G kind of did that with Trey Lance. And then you turn it over to him. That's not a bad succession plan, possibly, So that's
right.
One thing. Let's go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think to me, if you as a front office think that you do not have the dude, like I think of Tennessee right now with Ryan Tannehill, they have a great team around him. Yeah, his cap hit is huge as well, or it's going to get even bigger. But if you don't think that dude can win you a Super Bowl, or you can win a Super Bowl with him, then I think you have to move on, because what are you doing otherwise?
Correct. And I go back to sometimes in the NBA, they used to say you don't pay max money to a guy who's not a max player. And I think that's true. And that position is getting so exorbitant with the salaries that you're now having to pay big money for guys who are in that mid-tier range. And that's where it becomes difficult. And that's why you look for guys like, where's the sweet spot? Is it right in the middle? If you trade for Jimmy G, I keep bringing him up, and I only bring him up, people, because I know he's going to be available, not because I'm just advocating for it. But there's a sweet spot for some guys where it's like you don't have to give up a lot to get him, and he's not going to cost as much as some other guys. So you can still build while, to me, still looking for a guy. Anyway, let's move on to some other quarterbacks, because there are other guys there. The guy that I was most impressed with during the game was Desmond Ritter. How was he during the week, and what were because there's a lot of inconsistencies with him. And we all know that, but what was your impression on him, or what do you agree with that? And what was your take?
Yeah, I think the thing that I had heard and my impression was that he was a little bit more polished. I know that he was working on some of his mechanics. I know that the big thing for him was ball placement. He was, right. He'd float a pass or he'd, make a guy, really have a difficult catch when you shouldn't have. And that was, minimizing yards after catch. So the thing he was talking about, how he was lengthening his stride while he was there to try to, get more consistent ball placement, putting it in the frame of the receiver, allowing them to turn upfield, running back, tight end, whatever. I think that he was impressive. And I think that he is not a blend of Pickett and Willis, but I do think he has some mobility, but he's not the designed run guy. But I think that he obviously had a lot of pre-snap responsibility at Cincinnati, not as much as Carson Strong out of Nevada, who I think had the most. He had full autonomy at the line, protections, hot routes, everything like that. But he had, a good amount of responsibility. I think he's, pretty consistent. He was a 4-year starter. I thought he was very impressive and maybe flew a little bit under the radar at the Senior Bowl.
Excuse me. And I think with Ritter, you bring that up at that point. There were a couple of plays he had in the game, which is why I liked, because he did use the mobility to get outside the pocket, and he'd either mechanically do it right, keeping your eyes up, keeping the ball alive, or being able to make a play because you got outside the pocket and you were able to avoid a rush against bootleg or whatever. and still make a play with your arm. And I felt like his ball placement was better in the game than and more consistent. And he's a guy I think that would be after the first round. Is that what you heard?
I think he could play his way into maybe the end of the first round, but
Yeah,
certainly
okay, yeah.
I think that at 11, that's not really on the table.
No, you can't do it there. I think he's a guy that if you say, okay, if he's there in the second round and whatever, so right, that's way too.
Yeah, and I think North Carolina's Sam Howell is kind of in that same boat.
Yeah.
He could play himself up, but I think really people see him more as a second round guy.
What was your impression of Howell?
I mean, on the field, I think that there are a lot of questions because, obviously he ran an RPO based offense, a lot of gun, almost exclusively gun at North Carolina. And he's been working a lot under center. I think that, people were a little concerned coming in that, he wouldn't use his legs to extend the play, look downfield. He would take off and run. He did a ton of that in North Carolina. He lost a ton of production, including De'Ami Brown off his 2020 team when he had that breakout season. And 2021 was obviously disappointing for North Carolina. He lost a lot around him, but I think he tried to play hero. But he said he tried to play hero ball a little bit too much. Obviously, he's drawn the Baker Mayfield comparisons, and he kind of embraced that when asked about it. But in terms of his interview, he just kept saying, I want to show people who I am throughout this process. And I asked him, what does that mean? He said, I'm a man of God. I think that God has a plan for me. I'm a really good leader. I think I'm the best leader in this class. I think that I can get guys on the same page. So really, I think, and he, reiterated some form of that throughout the week. So to me, that's a guy who is marketing, I guess, to his teams, pitching to his teams that he was meeting with, leadership, and his ability to adapt to situations. That was kind of my impression of where Sam Howell was at.
It's funny you bring up the legs because in the second half of that game, that's primarily the plays he made were with his legs and just running. Now in the first half, there were a couple of times where he was able to extend and move up in the pocket and keep the play alive that way and moving in the pocket and through. I think he had a couple of completions that way. But what about Carson Strong?
I found Carson Strong really, I don't want to say unpolished because that sounds unflattering, but like he was the most just like real transparent. He went through like the most in-depth explanation of his knee surgery that I have ever heard from an athlete. He had this thing in his knee. I can't pronounce it, but basically he had 8 biodegradable screws put in his knee, and it should have taken a year for him to get back on the field. And he was out there 6 months later. He had the surgery last February. He was out for Nevada season, and he laughed and he was like, I was a statue back there for the first half of the season because I couldn't move around. And he said, he kind of spun it as I was so limited with mobility that it really improved my mental game because I had to have all the protections exactly right. I had to have my hot routes exactly right. I don't know if there's cursing allowed on the John Keim report, but he said basically if I didn't get through my reads and know exactly where I was going and set up everything right, I was shoot out of luck. So you could
have said it.
I could have said it. Okay, I didn't know if this was a family friendly, dad-esque podcast.
We're talking about a team that hasn't won in a while. There's a lot of people who are cursing when listening to it, so it's probably okay.
Okay. So, but I mean, he's a traditional pocket passer. He does not bring the mobility that even Kenny Pickett does, in terms of rolling out of the pocket and extending the play a little bit. He is less mobile than that. But he had full autonomy at Nevada, as we talked about. So he really, I think, is pitching, mental acuity. He'll get you in the right play. He has a lot of responsibility, and he's ready for a pro-style offense right now. He has a big arm, not the biggest. That's still Willis. But I think that one of the comparisons that I heard was like Kyle Trask out of Florida last year. Not 100%, but similar play style.
Yeah, I could see that. The one thing that jumped out again, and I'm not a scouting expert, draft expert, but when I watch guys, it's going to be closer to the draft, right? Just to get more so not to say like, I know everything about them, just to get a feel for their play, right? And, it's doing your homework, Sam. You know what I'm saying? You feel me on that?
Hey man, before we did this podcast, I grinded 10 hours of tape. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I know I was going to text you, but I thought there's no way he's up at 3:30 in the morning doing this. So I didn't want to bother you, but but with him, the one thing I haven't watched a lot of his games. I do believe he intrigues this team, but in watching the game Saturday, I felt like it kind of fit what I had heard about him with some of the inconsistencies with his ball placement, with his accuracy. And ball placement is just which shoulder are you hitting it on? Are you giving a chance, as you brought up earlier, you're giving a guy a chance to run with the ball. But there were some inconsistencies with his accuracy in that game. And you could see that he can move in the pocket, but he's not going to create anything on his own, which I think is what the book on him was. What did you see during the week, even just in practices?
Yeah, in practice, I think, similar things. You obviously didn't see the limited mobility as much, just because,
Right.
they weren't going 100%. But I think that, yeah, the ball placement, I would say that I thought we were talking about layering throws. He wasn't super accurate, but he had, I think, as much as anyone, the touch on his throws that he was able to, put right over corners on certain routes, or, because when he had to throw the bullet pass, we had to throw the touch pass, he really, it wasn't always in the exact right spot, but it seemed like it was the right velocity. It seemed like it was, getting where it needed to be at the time it needed to get there.
And I think that's where, again, that's why he's not going to go in the first round. He's got some skills that, and all that. He's another developmental guy. Did you hear much a comparison for him? Or you brought up Trask. Did you hear anything else from him, like either concerns by people or, as far as like his future and what he could maybe develop into?
Well, I think the knee thing really stands out because he had surgery on his right knee in high school, as a senior in high school as well. So this is a recurring thing. I didn't hear, a popular NFL comp or maybe what he would top out as or concerns long-term in that regard. I think mainly teams wanted to see how is the knee doing. That was the dominant question. I think he answered those questions, fairly well. But you're right. I mean, he's seen as a developmental guy, even though, was at Nevada for 4 years. But I think that mainly it's the knee. And I think the combine is going to be huge for him because, the medical evaluation has those biodegradable nails that he had in his knee or screws that he had in his knee, are those, is his knee looking, good? Is the inflammation staying down? But no comps in terms of passers people would know. So
basically the final takeaway on this whole group, do you come away thinking that, hey, if I have a pick, I'm taking Malik Willis? Would that be your line of thinking on this? Is he the guy that you come away most intrigued by?
Yeah, I think that this is the question over the next 3 months, basically, is how likely do we think it is that Malik Willis is capable of hitting his ceiling? Whether you do the psychological evaluation, the interview, you talk to people, work ethic was a concern at Auburn. And if we talk about developmental quarterbacks that were taken too early, that did not reach their potential, there is obviously a very clear recent example of Washington missing on that guy. Right. And I'm not saying they're two different quarterbacks, they're two different situations. I'm not saying they're the same, but there are some striking similarities. So for me, from what I've heard in Mobile, and unless things change, I would say Malik Willis is the only one in this class capable of being a true franchise passer, of being a talented guy that can go toe-to-toe with the young, talented quarterbacks that are coming up, mostly in the AFC, but that are, seem as though they have a chance to dominate the league for the next decade or so. If you want to compete with those teams, I think you got to go with that guy. Kenny Pickett could surprise me, but he would be surprising a lot of people if that was the case.
Yeah, and it almost feels like he'd be almost like a Daniel Jones pick. And I'm not comparing him to Daniel Jones, but like right. So, and in fairness to Willis, like the work ethic, you are allowed to evolve and improve in that area. So just because he was like that at Auburn, I mean, I remember like when you came in, my goodness, Nikki just said that Sam does not work. He's lazy. It's like I call him, he's probably sleeping on the couch. So, and then look at how you are now. So you've really improved too.
There's never been a Washington football team, command. It's going to take me a little bit to get used to that. There's never been a Washington Commanders beat writer to have his appendix burst in his first year on the beat and come back and make anything of himself.
That's true. But you didn't have any biodegradable screws put in there.
That's true. I think for reference, that was you.
Oh, that was me. That's right. Well, you had
Wait,
your
you didn't
appendix.
remember?
No, because you had your appendix out, didn't you? You had your appendix out last year, didn't you?
Yeah, in 2020, my first year on the beat,
Okay.
I remember I was laying in the hospital, during the bye week, and you called and you were like, "Hey, man, I know this sucks, but it happened to me my first year. You're gonna be okay."
It did, and that's like, the funny thing is, because it was my first preseason game I was going to cover, and as you know, it's a big deal to reach a point where you're covering an NFL team, because I just wanted to be in that press box. That's where I wanted to be. It was my first chance to be in the RFK press box. And I wake up with the appendix, it's like, I just thought it was a bad cramp. It wouldn't go away. Had to drive to the doctors. The nurse tells me, you have to go right to the hospital. We are taking your appendix out. And I started getting tears in my eyes. And she's like, oh, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I'm like, I know I'm going to be okay. I am so pissed I'm missing this game. Like, it meant that much to me. And I was on drugs, taking notes, listening to Frank Herzog on the radio as my wife's like, what are you doing? So, but I had a yellow legal pad of notes, listen to the game. So yes, and I did do that, but that's why if you want to follow my footsteps, I don't know. I don't know if you want to.
I can't believe you forgot.
Well, I didn't forget, but I just thought you were referencing you because I knew it happened to you. But yes, I knew it happened to me. Trust me, I haven't forgotten. I'm still pissed. But if you're still here, and this is the line, Sam. So in 20 some years, when this team is gone, I don't think you want to go down that road. I won't even do that to you. So I don't want to do that to you. All right. On that note, how else was Mobile? Did you have some good barbecue? And why wasn't it as good as mine?
To be fair, I've never had yours. I've never gotten the invite.
Well, just take my word.
Yeah. It's not as good as the pictures I see on Twitter. No, mostly oysters, some oysters and some seafood. But yeah, a tremendous time in Mobile. My first time down there. So really, I think a really valuable information gathering process in terms of, understanding, where prospects are at and where teams are at. I think that this, was a really good first window. We're going to get another one at the combine here in a couple of weeks. And we'll be off to draft season.
There you go. Sam, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. We got through with no dad jokes. Good job.
Yeah, no dad jokes, a couple appendix stories. I think the people are going to love it.
Yeah, I won't do if people want to know my latest dad joke, it's on Twitter. Just do Google with stud finders, and it's a predictable dad joke, and my wife rolls her eyes at it every time, but it works for me. So thanks a lot, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Con.